Hey, welcome back to Product Team Success. I'm your host, Ross Webb, joined by the ever-brilliant Henry Latham. Today, I'm excited to present a conversation that's bound to resonate with every product leader tuning in. Now, imagine starting your journey with a simple conversation with your boss and then navigating the path to directing product strategy at a global powerhouse like the Financial Times. Well, Debbie McMahon, who's joining us, has lived that journey, and she's here to unpack her insights from the sheer importance of empathy to envisaging the future of AI in product management. Now, get ready to be both inspired and challenged, and let's dive deep into the essence of product leadership with Debbie McMahon. Debbie, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Hi there. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. And would you mind letting the listeners and the viewers know a little bit about your background and how you got to be here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Debbie McMahon, and as Ross and Henry have already said, I'm the Product Director of Financial Times, looking after FTcom and apps. Previously, I worked at the BBC, and before that in Universal Credit. I've had a quite snaky journey into product management, in that it was somewhere I never expected I would be. But when I joined a project in government doing a non-technical, non-digital role, but sitting beside all these very interesting people doing something quite different, I kind of looked around and went, they're doing something much more interesting than me. How can I get involved in that? And that led me to where I am now, sort of 8, 9, 10 years later.
Oh, fantastic. That's, by the way, what was it specifically? How did you get that? How did you approach someone and say, how do I get into product? Because everybody always asks, myself, and Henry's probably coached, I think, over 350 people now. How did you manage that transition?
Yeah. So I did the thing. Thankfully, for once, isn't it good if you sort of practice the advice that you preach? I said I did the thing that I tell people to do, which is, if it's even remotely possible, start from where you are. Because if you're already in a company and you know the company and you have relationships and you have contacts there, then that is much easier than trying to go somewhere brand new and get a job as a product manager. Unless, of course, you're lucky enough to be at that stage in your career where you can start in that kind of graduate or entry track. But no, I sort of knocked on my boss's door and didn't specifically ask for a product job straight off. I kind of said, well, I could do some of this. I could take on a bit of that. And I sort of slowly started to do some parts around the edges that then got me closer and closer. And then at a particular point kind of went, I'm doing quite a different job now than when I originally started. Am I not? I was also very lucky that around me, and I wouldn't recommend that in every scenario, but around me at the time, there were some fantastic product leaders who weren't government based. They were contractors who'd come in to support the organisation, knowing that there weren't many people who had done this originally, and the developers who'd come from all sorts of walks of life, etc. So there was loads and loads of people with really, really strong skills and experience that I could learn from. So it wasn't sort of me leading myself through that process. And that is also something I recommend to people. If you are going to transition in, try and find a place where there is a solid base for which you can learn from.
That tees us up really well, in fact, for the sort of main topic I wanted to cover today. Because that journey in itself goes against much of the sort of the advice that I see out there about how to get into product management. I've run a boot camp where 10-20% of who we teach are people getting in. We only do that under certain conditions because, as you've said, right, it's not as simple as, product school, go pay $6,000, get a certificate and get a job. It's not really like that in the real world. So I wanted to ask today, I know you've got some opinions on this. There is a lot of advice out there. There are a lot of frameworks, different systems, processes, etc. What is your advice to, could be a product manager or let's say an aspiring product leader, when it comes to, how to sift through all of it?
Yeah. My really, really glib answer would be, particularly for somebody who ends up in that sort of product leadership role, is be distrustful of them all and figure out your own path. I think I've glibly answered this question before by saying something like, I hate them all. Like, what is the point of them? This is like it's a conspiracy to make us feel like we don't know what we're doing. Conspiracy is probably too strong a word, isn't it? Now, that is a very glib answer, and that's not exactly or entirely what I would think. But There is absolutely tons of stuff out there. Not that long ago, I think I read a post on LinkedIn, which I'm sure was well-intentioned, which was like the 100 frameworks every product leader needs their team to use. And I'm going, I don't have time to like read 100 of anything, never mind 100 frameworks. Like where am I magically going to get the time to do that? And surely if you did read 100 of anything, they're going to all contradict each other because everything is contextual based and it depends on the situation and who you are, who your team are, what kind of company you work in, what kind of industry you work in. Now, that doesn't mean I'm seeing an excuse going, there are no things and no tools that can help you. There definitely are. There really definitely are. But you do have to find the things that genuinely make sense for you as a person. You know, the things that resonate with you. The things that also the skills that your teams have can really genuinely work, and things that fit with your organization. Many of us use OKRs. The FT uses OKRs, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I would absolutely guarantee you that when you went back to the origin of OKRs and Google and where they came from, how we're all using them is now entirely different from where they were sort of intended or the genesis of where they came from. Doesn't mean they're not useful, but this thing that they were used for originally may not now apply in your context or your situation. And so that's the thing that I think is really important is how do you navigate your path through something like this and find what really does work for you.
Yeah, some really some nuggets in there that I really want to break down. I think it was really well said, Debbie. Just on that last point, something I feel, I work a lot with frameworks and sort of trying to give people an adaptable playbook. But there are, for example, let's take the concept of the lean startup. It's a really good philosophy. There's some really nice actionable frameworks and processes within that. But not only can it be, you could read, most people don't read the book. They have an idea of conception of what an MVP is and sort of that whole philosophy, and they misinterpret it in many cases. Clearly that's wrong and that's a challenge. But also it's, the world changes, right? As you say, like the theory of OKRs developed in a positive sense. I think Lean Startup is a really good example where, back in 2008, 2010, the market was far less competitive. Like we see 16 times the number of websites out today than just 10 years ago. So in terms of number of products, it's 10x, 15x, something like that. And I think that will go up with AI facilitating product development. So, the market's changed. It's far more competitive. Therefore, we need to change actually our approach and say potentially, we talk a lot about this minimal viable offer, validate demand for something before you build anything. And I think, as you said, it's just about really asking, going back to first principles and saying, like, does this actually make sense in our context? Now, on that, how do you know? How does one know, if it does make sense using framework A, framework B, or, process A, process B, for example? How do you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really, really important place for a product leader, particularly and I have only worked in sort of non-fully product-led organizations that existed long before product was a discipline and existed before, really realistically, before digital products were a thing. The FTs existed since 18 something, over 130 years anyway. I should probably check that. I think it's 135. The thing that is really important is you really understanding your organization, you absorbing it. I talk about, if you've not walked some time in other people's shoes and you don't really understand how your business operates, you're never going to be able to figure out what is going to be that thing, that idea, or the product that will really resonate with your business and with your customers. So really understanding that business and that organization you work in, I think, is crucial. And there's loads and loads of ways that you can do that, but time is ultimately the thing you need, of spending it with people, talking to them, observing what they're doing, and listening to your customers. The next thing I would say is really find the and this is where things like a strategy canvas or I do love, and I know it's not a framework, but even though the book is really old, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and where is your right to play, and where is your competitive advantage, or what is your guiding policy? Like some of those things that I think are just true, that they're not necessarily today's fad or the thing that changes over time. They're just truisms of understanding how you get stuff done. Is really getting to the heart of that. What is it that your organization has that no one else has, and how do you maximize, protect, build upon, or find the next version of that? And I guess that's a different version of really understanding the company. Then we're back to data, aren't we? But beyond that, when you've got your really strong guiding policy or the place you're going to play, what is the data telling you, and where can you realistically do something that makes sense for you? There's always an idea, and I was actually talking to somebody in my team about an idea this week, and you're kind of looking at it going, this is a great idea. Realistically, it's going to take like 3 years. Is that somewhere that we're going to put our chips right now as the kind of company we are? In some companies that would be yes, in ours probably not. But if the data leads us in this direction, how can we then take that data and kind of go, well, actually, let's roll that back a bit and figure out where we get to? So for me, it's understand the company, really find what that thing at the heart of what you're trying to do is, and articulate it really clearly. Make sure everybody understands that, because that's how you get your sort of critical mass and critical momentum. And then follow what the data says. And if you don't have data, do things as quickly and as simply and as easily as possible to get data in order to be able to keep going in that direction, or change direction if it's not right. Your first go round of this probably won't be right.
Yeah, I love that. I think you put, what is important in simple terms, which is, it's really easy to get caught up in like, which strategic framework should we use? Is it going to be Blue Ocean? Is it going to be some sort of like aligning roadmap with strategy? Like, actually, it doesn't really matter, right? It's like, where are we playing in the market? How do we know that we're winning in the market? And then, how do we deliver as quickly and easily as possible? And I think, I see many people getting caught up with, am I doing this? Am I mapping out our product strategy in the perfect way? And then by doing so, you delay action and get too caught up with the detail and forget really, what ultimately matters. And I think that's always a good question to come back to, right? Is, what is most important right now? How do we deliver value as quickly and easily as possible, whatever the framework, philosophy, process, etc. is there?
There are two things there, right? One is you were talking a lot about data, but you also were talking about understanding the business and the commercials. And a lot of what I see is, and a lot of other product leaders on the podcast talk about, is making sure that their product managers actually understand the commercials of their business. And I've run loads of product teams that really don't get that. They can't read a spreadsheet or understand the basic finances. And even like Vikas Seth, who was on the podcast last week, he was talking about actually running training so product managers could come and then become a lot more commercially astute. Have you done anything like that or run into that, or try to get, let's say, more junior product people to not just understand the data, but also to understand the other side, the commercials, the finance as well of the business?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's crucially important. Like, yes, the business itself and how it operates and how our customers interact and fit into it. But if you can't sit with someone and empathize, which I think is just like the thing for product managers, you have to have empathy for everybody in their position, which is many people in the end. And if you can't empathize with the challenge that person in front of you in, say, sales or marketing has, then you're not ultimately going to be as good at your job as you could be. It's also not for everyone. That's why there's a variety of product roles. So some of the roles in my organisation just now and in the BBC, we're not particularly commercially focused, because they're, say, helping us get our content out onto the site. And that's fine. Not everybody needs to be the same kind of product manager and have the same skill set. That is also a really important thing. Again, I think I'm now going to sound like all I do is like troll LinkedIn and find posts that I hate and like recall them and say how much I hate them. But that's not what I mean. Again, I saw something recently that like the 10 traits that every single like the top 1% of product managers have. It's like, no, surely not. So that's the top 1% of product managers in a particular context with a particular need, with a particular set of skills. Not everyone. But to go back to your question, because I'm now rambling, it was interesting. Earlier last year, I spent a bit of time with my team talking about some of the finance processes that our organisation go through. And I was really surprised. I assumed I was starting just doing a bit of a recap, going, oh, this is where they are and this is where the numbers are looking like. And it actually turned out that nobody had ever spoken to them about that.
Oh, really?
There's no way, they knew some of the underlying commercial data and, that was part of the data they looked at, but nobody had really spoken to them about how that came about or, what the timelines were and when things did and didn't happen and when they mattered. And there's no way a product manager can be good at that if nobody, if us as product leaders are not taking the time to involve them and help them and support them. I've not done anything super formal because I think there's something about, not everybody needs the same amount of information and, different things are important at different times. But I definitely have made a very conscious effort throughout my time to make sure people have more visibility than they typically have had, understand what's going on behind just the number that's in front of them and also what the consequence of those numbers are. Actually, just earlier this week, I spent a bit of time with the group product managers, principal engineers, the people that me and my tech director lead, talking through them in quite a lot of detail about things like the difference between OPEX and CAPEX, which some people go, oh, yawn, how boring. But when they're helping us make choices day to day about, like, is this the place we should invest some of our energy versus is over here the place we should invest it? I'm amazed that you could make those decisions as effectively as you could without understanding some of the intricacies of that and how it is dealt with in your particular organisation, which is not necessarily the same everywhere. Some of it is boring, as I say, it's not for everyone. That's why there are lots of different flavours of product roles. But if you're that person who really wants to say, right, I really want to help this organisation maximize its advertising revenue, like, how do we get it? What is an ad slot on our site worth, and why would somebody pay for this slot versus that slot? Really understanding that is then that's where it becomes super geeky and super interesting if you're into that. And then think of the value that you can then add even just in the conversation with your colleagues across the organization, because you really have gotten to grips with what is going on there and how the role you play can add value to it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, really, I love that. I think it's super actionable as well for other product leaders. Because it seems that, correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're suggesting there is, people more junior they don't know what they don't know in many cases, and you'll come in and rather than just saying, hey, why the hell aren't you worried about this technical piece or this commercial piece, just saying, here are the kind of questions you need to be thinking about. How are you going to answer that? Sure, happy to help and coach, but that's the thing to focus on. And I think that's a really clever way, right, to not get them to lean on blindly following sort of what they might be expected to do or what they think a product manager might have to do. And that ties into my next question. You're product director at FT currently. How do you get less experienced people, let's say, product managers you are managing, to not just blindly follow process or say, hey, I've seen Debbie use Blue Ocean strategy camera, so I'm going to use it for the product I'm working on, for example. Do you lean on that as your main, the sort of getting them to just focus on what's the question to think about? Are there any other tactics, for example, or is that what you think is really the most effective way to drive your coaching approach, let's say?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's something actually that I struggle a bit with, being honest, because I am quite... I'm talking to my coach about the fact that I am quite extreme in my opposite of being a control freak. In that I I want a big I want a big space in which to operate for myself. I'm really keen to have, to create as much space for myself to help drive the organization, help figure out where me and my teams can add most value. And I love to leave that for my people. So I do a lot of, have you thought about this? How do you, how would you look at that? But very little, here's what I would do. And it's interesting in that some of my team, particularly people who are less experienced, or for example, who've moved into a different area, they find that quite difficult. And they're like, just tell me what you would do. And I'm going, no, I'm not telling you. And that is a really tough balance as a leader, sort of walking through with somebody who is a sort of leader of others and sort of saying, no, like just really allow this person to make a mistake. Is anyone going to die? If nobody's going to die, like it is okay for them to like, unless you really know that they're going to hit a brick wall, do allow someone to make the mistake, because the learning they'll get will be much stronger. But that's hard for some people. Whereas for me, I'm like, yeah, that's sort of what I expect to happen all the time. But there is definitely a balance, and there is something about how do you create, and certainly what I am trying to do now is how do I create like guardrails, parameters, like where is the road or the track that I sort of expect you to be headed down? And if you're headed down in there, you can take a wiggly path and figure it out yourself. But if you're going at some kind of right angle, that's probably not going to be any good. And I am going to have to like more guide you back into the back into here and get a bit more involved. I think it's also being really explicit with your team about what kind of person you are. Where can I add most value to you? Here's, like, I know myself really well. Here's where I can be most useful, and then checking in with them, going, are you getting what you need? Like, what more do you need? Like, how are you getting on with how I operate?
So that, you say that is, I'd love to work for you. I'm definitely that kind of personality, or I like the autonomy, but for many people it is intimidating. So do you then counter that, as you say, by being, as supportive as possible, being a bit of a sounding board maybe, rather than being directive?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also creating communities within communities. Like, the FT is big enough that, I have sort of 15 product managers in my area. Like, that's a lot of people. I keep on talking to them about this. Like, they're a community in and of themselves. All their support doesn't have to come from me and the 2 group product managers. Their support can also come from each other. Some of them are absolutely fantastic at some stuff, better than I am. And some of them are better at other things, or have more experience in other things. And it's also helping them connect with each other and go, not all about what I can help and support you with, because I only know so much stuff. Like, some of you will have a better idea or a better answer. And also, like me and the 2 GPMs, we can't be in every session or meeting or thing that's tough. But if you think you're going to have a really tough session with a stakeholder, why don't you take somebody else in the team with you to back you? Particularly if they know that area well. Like, there's also definitely, for me,
use them as a soundboard right before that big meeting, whatever it is.
Exactly. How do they then connect with each other? Particularly as you get my team is relatively experienced. That they've got lots to share with each other. I've expended quite a lot of energy this year, particularly on how do you as a group connect? And it's less about what your leader can give you, but what I can give the whole group that then helps them sort of raise themselves.
Yeah, I know, a very strong cultural artifact, right? The fact that there's people looking, people around them, right, rather than always looking upwards to their direct manager, I suppose, for advice. There's a few things I really want to unpack there, Debbie. First thing that strikes me, your non-directive leadership style. I know you don't like absolutes, but do you look for a certain type of person when hiring? Like, are there any traits you think are important, and if so, is there any specific, question or exercise that you thread into your hiring process to find people that are comfortable with non-directive leadership, or is it something they just learn as they learn on the job?
Yeah, really good question. So one of the things I have always done in my hiring processes is ask people to come and talk me through a piece of work that they have done, and how they went about it, and then depending on what level the person is being hired at, whether they're more like a kind of group product manager kind of leadership level, or whether it's more a in team product manager at the more sort of execution, but ultimately leadership of a smaller whole level. And in there I am, and partly the reason I do that rather than a lot of organizations still do the tell us how would you go about designing a new music streaming service for Netflix, because they've decided they want that the kind of on the spot thing. I certainly have found that different personality types don't respond super well to that. If you're a kind of more reflective person, you need longer to think, like those kind of on the spot things like immediately kind of rule you out. But equally what it doesn't give me, and to your point, is really understanding when somebody talks through something that they've done, like who were they doing it with, and how, and what did they need around them in order for, because somebody's only going to tell you about something that was successful in that environment, maybe something that was hard but ultimately that they got to a good outcome of, which is obviously what we want, but what I'm looking out for there's one, how did they go about it, but also what did they need for that to be successful. And in actual fact, if this started very much as a go do this thing and then they did a great job of that, like I really need to probe into that really hard to go, well, that's probably not going to happen here. So can this person take a more open question of this area is not performing so well, what would we do? Or would we do this versus this? And can they run with that? Or are they someone whose stronger preference does seem to be for an environment where here is the problem, here's your space, just go and do something here to get to this answer, and that is at least partly why I do that. Plus, also I do think you allow different personality types a sort of more even chance of telling you a good story that would show their abilities than that kind of on the spot thing.
So, Debbie, one of the things you've said is being at the FT, which is, you said, 135 years old, how do you deal with people that don't get products? And I'm talking about peers, C-suite, senior leadership that don't understand.
Yeah. I am quite well practiced at that. And wow, like the answer to that is wide ranging and varied. I'm lucky at the FT that I think there are few people, and similarly at the BBC, there's few people who would kind of go, like, what is product? Like it has been around long enough now that people are relatively comfortable, at least with the concept. What I actually find is that it's often more in the delivery, the actuals of what you do, that then where you end up with mismatches of people going, oh, I see the theory and I see on paper, but yet still. So there's a few things. There's right back to the beginning when I talked about knowing your business and your organization. Like you can't get credibility somewhere if you don't know that, and waving your hands and saying things like blue ocean strategy and an MVP to deliver product market fit in a differentiated environment, and like sentence after sentence that just sounds like you're from a different planet than the person you're trying to communicate with, is like literally not going to help. And everyone is going to go, what is wrong with you? So yeah. There is definitely, yeah.
Sorry, Debbie, on that, I completely agree. One thing that I hammer home to students is don't, go in and throw words like, here's this blue ocean strategy camera series, because what the hell is that? Put it in simple, comes back to your general philosophy, right? Which is, what's the thing behind the thing? Like if we're talking about the buzzword product strategy, what is that? Rather than talking about blue ocean strategy camera, say, look, here's how we are going to differentiate our product. And by differentiate, that means we're going to be able to attract and engage and create value for our specific target market. We never even need to mention the word MVP. We never need to mention the word blue ocean. And in fact, in many cases, I find with my coaching that the people that lean most on the buzzwords are the ones that have a weaker theoretical experiential foundation, in fact, with those. Right? People that are, someone like yourself, like you get Blue Ocean, you get product strategy, you can explain it to a 4-year-old because you have a good depth of knowledge and experience. And so something I always say to people is like, it's, again, I use the same example, Blue Ocean strategy, right? Great framework, really powerful, but you can't just go and randomly map that out in an Excel sheet. You need to go and get the experience of actually defining, okay, well, what's that product going to look like? Go and validate the product offer, see how the market reacts so that you actually think deeply about the decisions you're making rather than just going, hey, yeah, we're going to be like the most reliable. Yeah, we're going to be the cheapest and we're going to be the best one as well. Easy to put on a graph, hard to actually go and do in practice, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true of stakeholders, how we communicate to them effectively as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As well as drop the jargon, know your business, and you start from where you are. You can't pretend you're somewhere that you're not. You have to start from where you are. Like the thing that it's like my mantra, which is delivery builds trust. Like unless you have joined an utter shit show, like which occasionally you do, I wouldn't recommend it to people, but occasionally you do where everybody's like, oh my gosh, we just need someone to save us because this is an absolute disaster. Unless that is the scenario, then you have a world that is operating whether you were there or not, and whether that's you as a product leader or you as a product manager or both. If you want people to buy into, in some cases, doing things quite differently than they did yesterday, delivery builds trust. Now, sometimes that might mean doing things that you don't even necessarily completely agree with, or doing them in a way that you don't necessarily completely agree with, because the output of something, whether it be positive or negative, is a thing you can then use in order to gain the next level of trust, to mean that the next time, let's push further, let's do riskier, let's go riskier, or let's go smaller, or let's go bigger, depending on in the context in your environment. You cannot ask someone to buy into a 3-month discovery within a 3-month research period, within some prototyping, and a year later they might have a thing when there's a business problem in front of them today. Now, I'm not also suggesting like you just respond to tiny little things that are in front of you. There is something about how do you use those things to point to a longer term. But ultimately, delivery builds trust. It's the thing that is the currency that we all, whether we like it or not, that we all use and we all need in order to help both our teams, our people, but also organizations make good choices. And if you haven't built up that trust, what can you, how can you do that as quickly as possible? And in my view, it's getting some stuff out the door that it matters to the organization, even if that's not exactly in the way that you would necessarily choose to do it in a perfect world.
100%. And I think it's even if you are joining an organization that, as you said in the beginning, that is a total shit show, it's still going through those really hard experiences together builds really strong rapport and really strong bonds with the team, because you've gone through something hard, come up the other side. And helps foster that trust, right? So based on that, and based on talking about those challenges, I'd love to hear about like 1 or 2 challenges that you're currently dealing with. I don't necessarily mean with the FT. I mean just generally, as a director of product.
Sure. So I think, like I nearly said, I'm going to say AI, but I'm actually just not going to say AI because I'm sure just everyone says AI and I don't really know what the challenge is. Maybe it's just an opportunity. So let me not say that. I would say that one of the big challenges just now in this, we're sort of in AI, but we're not in AI era, is helping my people understand where their role can go in future. And I'm ignoring AI in that product is still, if you look at it, like I graduated from uni in like 2004. Gosh, that's a long time ago now. Like there's no way I could have envisaged being a product manager in 2004, because I think the only product managers that existed then were in Silicon Valley, in very specific companies miles away from me. The product has changed a huge amount in the last 20 years and now is a recognized discipline. But what is the path? What is the path for people? Are people coming into product now? Some people are coming into product straight straight from uni or very close to straight from uni, maybe doing 1 or 2 years in something else. Is the path they're headed to, is it product straight up onto the board? And is that sufficient experience? And does that give them sufficient grounding and rounding? One of the really interesting dilemmas that I have, specifically at the FT just now, is that ultimately a group product manager role, and other people might call them principals or lead or exec product managers, they're leaders of people. But product managers don't typically lead people. So how do you, they lead cross-functional teams. How do you get that exposure and experience to make that step up? It's like the career path is getting more solid, but doesn't feel completely clear. And there's quite a lot of, I think, questioning, and people who work for me and people who I coach and mentor going, do I need to step out of product for a bit and do a more businessy thing, step back in? Does product head to the C-suite or doesn't it? And I think that is, if you put that alongside, and I will say AI, and what do any of our roles become in that context, I think that's it's really interesting, but it's also quite a big challenge and dilemma. What is the thing that you would recommend to someone just now? And what is the way they're going to maximize their career and their leadership potential? I think it's super interesting, but also quite complicated. And then the second thing I would say is the product and tech relationship and how we truly maximize that. I am not a fan, as I've already indicated, of specific frameworks or things having to be set down like this or like that. But I have done very similar roles in 3 organizations now, and how that relationship works, like from line management, accountability, responsibility, is fundamentally different. Not even different shades of the same color, just different colors. Is that right? Is that how we maximize our product development, by doing the things quite wildly differently? But where things like accountability and people sit. Maybe it is, but it feels to me that there's still quite a lot of thinking we as an industry need to do about where and who is best placed to make decisions, to understand priorities and interact with the business. And I think that that is one that I am sort of watching with interest and seeing whether any consensus emerges, because it feels to me like, particularly given the previous conversation, is everyone going to end up with a CTPO? Are we going to end up with product and engineering in completely different parts of the organization? That's where some places have gone. Is that good? Doesn't feel like it to me, but that to me is, your peer relationships are super important. Most product people, their peer relationships are not with other product people. That's not who runs the bit of the organization they're working. It's an engineering director, it's a delivery director. How does that triumvirate actually work together going forward? I think it's really interesting and quite a big challenge still to be worked through.
It still is. I love how much product is changing. And Debbie, I really want to thank you so much for being with us today. I think it's been a breath of fresh air. I love the fact that you've got fantastic views, especially about specific LinkedIn posts that also drive me a little bit crazy.
So I don't hate LinkedIn. There's lots of good stuff there. Just don't believe it all.
No, it didn't come across.
Yeah, a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, is the right approach for sure.
And thanks also not just saying it's just AI, because that also gets a bit boring after a while. But Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today. And if any of the listeners want to reach out, are you okay if we share your LinkedIn?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would. I'm. You can tell I like talking, so I would absolutely up for chatting to anybody who would like to disagree with anything I've said, or agree with it, or talk about anything else. Would love to.
Thanks. We'll share that in the show notes. And for everybody watching or listening today, I really hope you've enjoyed this. It's been a fascinating conversation between myself, my co-host Henry Latham, and Debbie McMahon from the FT. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.